worked with and out there. So we want to share that with you. Now we're going to shift gears a bit and turn a little bit to capacity building. For the last several years, great progress has been made in customs reform and modernization in the WCO East and Southern Africa region. This is in large part due to the efforts of the WCO Regional Office for Capacity Building in that region, which is led by its director, Christine Msemburi, who is to my left at the moment. And in addition to what the ESA ROCB is accomplishing on capacity building, it was the first WCO ROCB to host a regional WCO research conference, which took place last year in Zimbabwe and which I was fortunate enough to attend. Approximately 10 papers were presented by customs officers and academics on the subject of trade facilitation. Christine mobilized resources to support the event. She recruited 2 academics to provide advice to the writers, who were mostly customs officers, and organizationally delivered a fantastic conference. In addition, she had 1 or 2 sessions delivered by academics on research methods, which was particularly useful and I think is something that we'll want to incorporate into a future PICARD conference. Thus, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the director, who will present on a number of subjects. Christine?
Good evening, everybody. Is it still evening or afternoon looking at outside? When you're in a place where the sun doesn't set in the correct time, it becomes a bit difficult. We come from Africa, and the sun sets at a decent hour, around 6, latest around 7. So this kind of behavior is totally anomalous as far as we are concerned. I'd like to thank the WCO for providing me with the opportunity to speak on this platform. I'd also like to thank the Azerbaijan Customs Committee for the sterling job they have done in hosting us. I'd also like to thank Korea Customs Service for making it possible for me in particular to be able to attend. You'll find, even as we speak on what is happening right now, even in our region, one of the biggest challenges our customs administrations have to be able to be in places like this is financial challenges. So we need to find innovative ways to make sure that these things can also be possible. I want to make a disclaimer right now to all the professors, all the doctors, Professor Widdowson sitting up front. My research material comes from all sorts of dicey sources. Some of it even comes, I think if there are any people like myself, from Daily Mail, and I've incorporated it in here because I think sometimes we are too serious and we need to lighten things up for a change. I want you all, I'm going to ask you to do something. Can you all close your eyes? I can see you, even the guys that are over there, if your eyes are open. When you close your eyes, I want you to get up. I want you to run a reel backwards, 15 years ago. I want you to get up and walk into your office. Sit down and look and see what's on your desk. I'm sure for some people there's a mixture of paper. Some of your processes are manual. You are doing your things and you have to sign lots of papers. I want you to get up off your desk and walk out of your office and go into the corridor. Then we're going to do a fast forward. Let's go to this year. Move back into your office and sit down and see the differences of how you do your work now. and just examine the differences that are there between now and 15 years ago. In your mind, again, I want to ask you to get up, go back to the passage, close the door, come back into your office, sit at your desk. I would like you to imagine your office 15 years from now. And try to think, what are the changes that potentially could have happened from now and to 15 years in the future? You can open up your eyes. The reason why I'm asking you to imagine the future is because if we don't see a future that is different from where we are now, it will be very difficult for us to prepare for it. So we need to start imagining, and we need to start thinking at this point what 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now are going to be, so that we put the plans in place that will enable our organizations to be able to function as they ought to in that time. When I was talking about Daily Mail, it's that issue that's there, writing a letter to your future self. Any of you heard about Kim Kardashian? They had an article about Kim Kardashian and her brother, and her receiving a letter that the brother had written to his future self. And it got me thinking, it was at the time that we're actually preparing for this particular meeting, and it got me thinking and asking myself that in terms of my work, what would I tell my future self? What are the things that I think could happen? Like I said, 15 years ago, we had a mixture of systems, both manual and probably some of them that are actually computerized. Right now, virtually, I think most of our processes are totally computerized. I've seen the changes that have happened now, technological changes that are coming up at the present moment. If you just look at the size of laptops, they're getting smaller and smaller. And what does that imply for us as customs? The novel 1984 by George Orwell, ignore the 1980. 1984 by George Orwell talks of things that, it was written in 1945, and it spoke of things that seemed to be impossibilities at that time. They talked about rockets, rocket bombs. At that time, during the world wars, they were still throwing bombs out of aeroplanes. You had to go and set a bomb and set it off at that point. But today, if you think about it, we now can send a bomb to another country, 100 kilometers, 178 kilometers, and I think the fight is to try and push it further and further from another point. All you simply need is a rocket launcher. And 1984 was predicting that. There's Big Brother in 1984. And Big Brother, right now we've got the reality show, Big Brother, which actually replicates at a smaller scale what that novel spoke of. And what you have in Big Brother is a house where everybody's in there and everything they do is watched. There's surveillance. And maybe we can remind ourselves of the 2013 National Security Agency scandal, which talked about people's information that was being collected. So the world of 1984 is coming to pass in this time. So, if we look at ourselves and ask ourselves, is it possible to start predicting the future while we're sitting in this place? I say it is possible. The only challenge we have is that as customs, we are allowing other people to predict our future. We are responding most of the time, and we are not the ones who are at the forefront of dictating what the future for customs should look like. And I think research and development is the place where we are capable of starting to dictate where the future is going in advance of all the things that are going on around us. Innovation. I actually wanted to title this particular slide, Innovate or Die. And the reason why I was saying that is because if we don't keep reinventing ourselves, the next thing that will happen is we will indeed die. So, customs in the 21st century is about trade facilitation, the revised Kyoto Convention, but its purpose is to give customs a platform from which to innovate. And one of the things that we do realize is the fact that innovation on your own may be difficult, but the partnerships that you create in platforms like these are the ones that will help us to continue innovating and taking over our own future. I'm excited to say that customs has always found practical uses for innovation. And like I said, look at the software developments that we have. There is now a proliferation of software that we can use for customs services. Customs, but still needs to move faster than the speed at which things are happening currently. We are always lagging behind. We are chasing after. I think some of the discussions that have happened prior to this, where we were talking about the fact that sometimes we don't even understand what exactly business is doing for us to be able to tax correctly what's going on. It comes from the fact that we are still following behind. And we need to start thinking in terms of our own R&D. The research and development, yeah, let's do the assessment of our policies, but let's also think in terms of what is going on within industries. Let's begin to understand what it is that is changing within industry for us to be able to innovate further and be able to keep up with what is going on in industry. I also believe that capacity building should now focus on future talent requirements. And the only way we can focus on developing a future talent is by having an understanding of what the future might look like. So we need to go beyond the concrete planning that we do of things that we know, but we need to start thinking in terms of even dreaming of the future and seeing what the future looks like. Let's sit in our offices and let's ask ourselves, let's close our eyes and let's ask ourselves, 15 years from now, what do I think this place will look like? What do I think the demands of this job will be? Therefore, what kind of a person do I need to start training today who will be capable of delivering 15 years from today? Our research should tell our own story. Too many times, there are people who are telling our stories, and when they tell our stories, they sometimes don't understand why we do what we do. I think the collaborations that are happening right now make it even easier. But I think you could also tell from some of the questions we're asking some of the researchers that were sitting up front, it was because some of the answers they gave us, there's one gentleman who actually said, I am not from customs, so some of those things I cannot answer you. The best person to tell your story will always be yourself, because you are the best person who understands the motivations of why you do what you do. So I would like to encourage customs more and more to participate by telling their story in such forums. Let's begin to learn the things that the academics require for us to have research that meets the correct requirements. But even beyond that, let's go on ahead, even if sometimes the telling of our story does not have to be research. Let's write novels, let's write stories of things that happen at borders. Let's do articles that go into magazines. Let's come in here next time, let's start talking about beyond just having customs journals. Let's talk about the customs magazine that tells the stories of things that happen at borders. Research must also speak to current issues. What's going on, the assessment of policy. Is it working, is it not working? I think today we spoke about rules of origin, a sticky matter, but one of the ideas that was coming out of the discussion that was coming in here, do we really need rules of origin to remain the way they are? And I'm sure what's going to be birthed out of that is a simplification of that process. There's also going to be more debate and deeper debate on those rules of origin. And who knows, 5 years from now, we'll probably have a new way of looking at originating matters that, of originating things that are going through our borders. Research should also speak to the future. Let's become foretellers. Let's become people that can write a novel in 1945. And 40 years later, all of us can, 60, 70, 80 years later, people can say, somebody foretold this when they wrote and they said, this is how it will go. There is no problem. I think sometimes the problem that happens with us is we get so busy and we have such a concrete method of doing things. We can't move out of the concrete to begin to look at the intangible and come up with new tangibles that we will see for the future. My proposal, therefore, is that we continue to have a research focus that looks at innovation and change, that looks at evaluation and impact assessment. And then let's also talk about what's going on in the industry. There are so many things. I know today we talked about this is what's happening in the industry, this is what's going on. But how are we going to transform ourselves? How are we going to change ourselves? In there, let's keep looking and reviewing. Sometimes we review to look at ourselves for us to confirm that we're in the right direction. So I think research is the continued way to go. Let me get off my hobby horse and let me now talk about the WCO story. Again, I think when Robert talked about our research conference, it's because we came to a place where we say to ourselves, ESSA Customs has to tell its own story. People were not meeting the standards that were required for PICARD conferences. Each time they put in proposals, they were falling short. We also, I think from the INCU side, they were trying to encourage African universities to become a part of the INCU network. And we didn't seem to be making as much progress as we could do. So we thought, maybe let's do something that is small scale, that is in our own region, to make people see that it's actually doable. And so we looked for funding. We were supported by DFID, and were able to actually do a call for papers from both private sector and government organizations as well as customs within the ESSA region. We actually ended up getting even a paper. The winning paper that we got came from the private sector and from Switzerland, interestingly enough. The themes that we looked at, the themes were customs and trade facilitation, building institutional capacity and the body of knowledge in customs through research. And in theme 1, we looked at trade facilitation, perspectives from the private sector on the trade facilitation tools and instruments implemented in ESSA. Theme 2 looked at trade facilitation, the impact of ICT on trade facilitation. Theme 3 looked at transit management systems, an ideal model for ESSA. Theme 4 looked at the implementation of the RKC. Theme 5 looked at key pillars by customs and revenue administrations to successfully implement the trade agreements in COMESA, EAC, and SADC. Our region has a number of trade blocks, and in there, we actually left out SACU. And we also have a multiplicity of membership by our member states. And so one of the things we wanted to look at, because there's a drive to try and get members to at least belong to one as opposed to the multiple numbers of blocks, trade blocks that they are in. And so we wanted to see if we could get research that came out of that. And then we looked at customs capacity building initiatives in ESSA. This just repeating what Robert had talked about in his introduction. So I'll skip that. What we tried to make sure is that we integrated our regional strategy and implementation plan for the region in the areas that were actually being researched, so that it gives us feedback on how successful we are being. And we also wanted to see a delivery that supported the strengthening of professionalism in human capital. We then planned that it would be every 2 years that we'll be able to do this conference. And we've asked that the regional training centers be the ones that actually coordinate that process together with the ROCB. So, in conclusion, what we're trying to drive within the region is innovation, innovation, and more innovation. We are also, as an ROCB, committed to partnerships and encouraging work with our universities within the region. And we are looking forward to the second ESSA Regional Research Conference in 2016-2017. And at the moment, we are now working on trying to make sure that that research conference takes place. At the end of all this, research and development within customs is going to take everybody. Trade, it's going to take the private sector, it's going to take academia, customs organizations themselves, and governments putting their heads together for us to continue developing within customs. I'm looking forward to the day where we'll actually be able to talk about innovations that have happened, that have affected the private sector for good. I think most of the complaints you hear is that we come up with policies that don't work, policies that make things difficult for trade. But there should be a merging and a melding of minds eventually if we continue to have forums like these, because we'll continue an exchange of ideas and have platforms where we are able to look to a better future for all of these things. Thank you very much.